So here we are yet again. This time it's my turn to introduce the question, which will be a surprise to you. You ready?
I think so.
Okay, here's the question I've been thinking about. Why do we allow the very things we complain about the most? Why do we allow the very things that we complain about the most?
Great question, first of all. And I think that, I mean, this is common with all of us, right? Like, we almost like to have something to complain about. Um, I try to catch myself when I do this. And I ask myself a lot of questions. What am I complaining about? Why am I complaining about this? And like, what is the source of it? And I think there's a lot of different things here. My first thought immediately goes to familiarity. We are familiar with the things that bother us, whether that is at work or whether that is with a partner. Um, we know what bothers us. We are aware of what creates stress for us. And so it's almost this paradox of we like to have something to complain about because it feels familiar. We can attach to it. It is something that we've carried with us our whole life, and therefore our neural pathways that are ingrained in our brain. Um, but also, there's another side to it of when we complain, for a lot of people, that is a sense of releasing energy. It is a sense of stress. I think where most people get stuck is that they then don't do anything about it. They stay stuck in that loop of stress. And then they go right back to complaining again rather than realizing they have so much power to change, maybe not the thing itself or the source of the complaining itself, but how I respond to it, how I perceive it. So those are my first couple of thoughts. We allow the things that we complain about because it feels familiar, and therefore our brain can predict it. And sometimes we feel safe in modes of stress rather than facing another stress that is uncertain and therefore could possibly be more threatening to us.
Hmm. So there's something here.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a very normal thing. And honestly, a lot of it goes back to our subconscious programming. If we watched our parents growing up complain about the weather all of the time, as a super silly example, we're more likely to complain about the weather because we've been exposed to that in the past and we are familiar with that complaint, and we just kind of stay in that loop. And a lot of us don't realize what it is actually doing to our brains, to our physiology. Research shows over and over and over again that complaining without action is linked to worse health outcomes because complaining creates a lot of stress in the body. It increases cortisol and adrenaline. And oftentimes, when left undressed, those things create chronic inflammation, which, obviously impairs our health. And so, negative thoughts and complaining, again, that stay just in that realm of complaining and negative thoughts and don't move beyond into action, create worse health outcomes for most of us. I mean, we see even, something as simple as dementia and Alzheimer's is correlated to negative thoughts and negative thinking and complaining without action.
Would you would you suggest that the act of complaining is giving us almost like a counterfeit positive hit as I'm doing something about it, even though I'm not doing anything about it? Does it give us that sort of fake? I'm curious that like, does this perpetuate a downward spiral? Like we complain about the thing, yet leave it unaddressed, but somehow it gives us a feeling like we're taking action, but we don't, and it's all these unhealthy things. I'm kind of curious, does it create a paradox?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is definitely like a loop that just keeps us stuck. So, And oftentimes complaining is very much a habit. It's habitual. It's something that we've ingrained in our brains. Like I said before, it very much is a neural pathway. And there's three parts to a habit: the trigger, the behavior, and then the reward. So when there is this habit, if it is complaining, which it is for a lot of us, complaining very much is a habit, we have the trigger. So we have the thing, and I'm trying to think of something that I complain about. But it's whatever triggers that moment of complaining. And I'll use the weather again because I'm originally from Orlando, Florida. I used to live in the Caribbean playing professional soccer. I love the sun. So when it rains, I complain because I want to be outside. I want to be in the sun. I want my feet in the grass, and rain just kind of puts a damper on things for me. So I'll just use that as an example. So when it starts raining, that is the trigger. That's the first element of a habit. Then I have the behavior. The behavior is me complaining. Oh my gosh, I hate the rain. When is it going to stop? Why do we even need rain? There's no purpose for it, which obviously that is false. But I get stuck in that negative loop where I just complain. And then the third element that reinforces the first two is that little bit of reward. Whether that is me feeling a little bit of stress relief of, okay, now everybody knows how I feel about this thing. I've gotten my opinion out there. People are listening to me. And maybe I get that little bit of relief from that stress. So I get that little bit of hit of reward and dopamine from completing that loop. And then that dopamine is what tells my brain, hey, we like that. This is worth repeating. Do it again. So next time we see that same trigger, you're going to perform the same behavior and you're going to get that same little bit of reward. The super interesting thing is that we can apply this in ways that benefit us. So another, like, I guess, example, taking it kind of out of complaining and maybe into more of a practical example that people can understand and relate to is smokers, individuals who smoke cigarettes. So the trigger is maybe they get inside of their car. The behavior is they light up, and the reward is what they get from that feeling of the nicotine. And again, that feeling reinforces that loop. And so most of us are stuck in habitual loops of complaining, and we don't even realize it because we do get all three of those elements that keep us stuck.
Wow, yeah. I'm thinking about a great number of things. So something that's immediately coming to mind is the camaraderie that comes from complaints. So I often joke, so in my generative listening programming, I talk a lot about social norms and the fact that social norms are so different depending on where you are in the country, even within towns within a certain state. And growing up near Boston, Massachusetts, joking about like, how do you make a friend with a stranger in the Boston area, which is not easy, is to get in line at Dunkin' Donuts and start complaining. And then you find connection and camaraderie, like the easy ones always, the things that are obvious, like the weather or the potholes or, whatever it is that may be. But, even going to sort of the smoker thing, part of that ritual that it's kind of interesting to think of a replacement ritual was, so as a past smoker, right, one of the things that would be true is that you would gather with others and you'd wind up having small talk with them, asking for a light or whatever it may be. But there's like this camaraderie that can come through complaints that I think is sort of a feeble attempt at a connection with someone, which is also desirable too. It's kind of I feel like it's a fairly, in most parts of the country, a fairly universal currency for making spontaneous connections, make commentary about the weather, that kind of thing. I'm curious about just the camaraderie hit that is so fulfilling and desperate that we have, right, to connect with other people, that comes from it as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point. We are very much social beings. Our our purpose is to belong. Our purpose is to feel seen and understood and emotionally connected to people. Because again, if we go back to hunter-gatherer times when our, brain mostly developed, if we were part of the tribe and part of the group, and if we belonged, we had a much higher chance of survival. And so what's happening here is we're playing on that same concept of, I need to belong. I need to feel part of the group. So if I complain about something and then I can get three other people to agree with me, that means I'm safe because I'm one of them and they're one of me. And, the phrase misery loves company, it's extremely, extremely
Mm,
true for so many reasons. The social connection reason, feeling seen, feeling understood. Um, and sometimes psychologists refer to this as co-rumination, which makes sense. It's just that repeated discussing problems together without actually moving towards solutions. And the good part about this is it can actually increase that feeling of connection and closeness and social belonging. The bad part that I already talked about plays back to that concept of ants or automatic negative thoughts. It increases stress and anxiety, and people can stay mentally stuck in that conversation. And there's actually some interesting studies coming out around therapy, because great therapists are fantastic. They help you address the problem. They help you see why this is happening, where did it root from, and then give you the tools, strategies, and techniques to move past it. But if you have a therapist that is not so great, a lot of them will actually just keep you discussing the problem over and over and over again. And we actually see that those individuals that stay stuck in those loops do not recover, and they do not get better, and they see higher rates of anxiety and depression because they're staying in that world, and their brain is rehearsing it over and over, and they're believing that everything is negative and I don't have the ability to move beyond this. The other part of it that I always love to talk about, there's kind of two aspects of it when it comes to this social reward from engaging in collective complaining, is something called emotional contagion and brain
mm,
synchronization. So when you're having a conversation with somebody, and I think we've touched on this earlier in another podcast, your brain waves literally sync up with each other. They're feeding off of each other. And it happens below your conscious awareness. But this is why people that spend a lot of time together can finish each other's sentences, why they can predict what the other person is going to say, or why, sometimes if something funny happens, you look at that best friend to see how they're going to respond. Like, it's all because you're so synced up. And then the other part of it is emotional contagion. And it's this concept of when we are in a room with individuals who are experiencing extreme emotions. So this can be joy, it can be excitement, it can be anything along those lines, or it can be more along the and I don't like to say negative, because anger and stress, I don't think are negative. They're just opposite ends of the spectrum, and all of it is just a signal. It's feedback. None of it is innately good or bad. And the full spectrum is absolutely necessary. But with that being said, when people are experiencing these extreme emotions, whether it's on one end of the spectrum or the other, you actually have the power and the ability to impact the emotional state of everybody else around you. There's a really fascinating study where they took a group of people, they put them in a room, they showed them a really scary movie, and they left the room. They brought in a new group. They didn't show them anything. And they measured the stress levels and the cortisol of those people before and after, the second group, before and after. And when they entered the room, their cortisol increased because the first group had left behind something called chemo signals, which are transferred through your sweat, through like any perspiration, through your breath. And the second group's nervous system picked up on that subconsciously and matched that energy, even though they were not exposed to the scary movie. And this is what happens in collaborative complaining. We literally take on the emotions of those that are around us below our conscious awareness.
So I may have observed this, kind of a funny yet challenging story of what happened over the weekend. So we have triplet kittens. They're just about a year old, and one of them ended up treeing themselves. And we had the fire department here. We had the game, the animal control, whatever. They're all just like, "There's nothing we can do. The cat's got to come down on their own," kind of thing. So anyway, it was 48 hours later before this cat finally gave up and came down dramatically. everyone's safe and fine, but bringing her back into the house, she's got two siblings, right? And the immediate response from the siblings was caution, almost like the cat was a stranger, and they would sort of walk up and sniff and then back off and walk. And it was, my conclusion was that like her massive doses of adrenaline and all these things, she probably smelled like different, like a different animal. And it was wild how they both behaved. One swooned in and the other just stayed away, but kept like 4 to 5 foot distance for hours before things returned to normal. Am I imagining that, or is that something like what you're suggesting?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And animals pick up on it a lot more than we do for a variety of reasons. One, their sense of smell is better than ours. Um, and two, animals typically are more in tune with their innate senses, and humans are not, because we are distracted by social media and the news and all of these other external stimulus that impact our ability to really tap into that innate like responses, reflexes, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, absolutely, you're onto something there, and that's absolutely what I would have come to as well, for
Mhm.
sure. And it's super fascinating to watch and observe animals in situations like that.
It was
And that's
wild, like
why,
completely different behavior toward each other as a result.
yeah,
It wore off, but it's like, whoa. Yeah.
and that's why we study animals so much, because we also are mammals and we do respond in a lot of the same ways. And there's a lot more variables when it comes to studying human social behavior, just because of all of the things that we have impacting us. But it's so fascinating to watch animals through social experiments like this. And animals have a very similar um, situation when it comes to, that negative versus positive emotion. They also feed off of each other. So,
Yeah. Some of the funny story. So my wife and I were climbing Mount Monadnock, which is southern New Hampshire, and it was, I mean, could easily be described as the most perfect, gorgeous day you could imagine, right? Views galore, air was cool. It was just spectacular. And we're sitting there on a rock just enjoying a snack. A couple older gentlemen are hiking by and, start some small talk with one. I'm like, we're talking about what a gorgeous day it was. And meanwhile, they meander off. And within a couple of minutes, you hear one of the other guys say, I don't know, Hank, it could be a little bit colder. Right, even in the and so New England, right? This kind of thing, like just couldn't help himself. Like I don't know, Hank, right? We still tell this story to this day, just how funny that was. Like the most spectacular day, and yet there's something to complain about. I want to talk about a framing I find useful. So I find complaints one of my favorite things because if you chase them down, they surface so much opportunity. And the book Three Laws of Performance, which is a book I love a great deal. Steve Zaffron, I can't remember the other author, but the way they describe complaints is as a racket. So a racket being, there's a soda shop in the front and there's gambling in the back, right? So the complaint is the soda shop, and the complaint's buying you something. And so it's important to understand if you have a perennial complaint, like one of the examples they use is of your partner. Well, my partner's always late, and that, complaint happens a lot. It's like, well, what's the payoff for having that complaint? Likely it's you get to be right about them. But that complaint is costly. And so how
mm-hmm.
much is it costing you? So what they recommend is sort of an inquiry into your own complaints to say, okay, what's this ongoing complaint buying me? It's buying me something or I wouldn't have it. And it could be, and this is the dangerous one, abdicating responsibility for doing the harder thing, which is addressing it. That could be the payoff. And then to really analyze what's it actually costing, right? Look, so in that example of that relationship, it's costing putting distance between those two people, having that
Mm-hmm.
perennial complaint. So I'm curious about your take on that framing, as far as like how do we get around this, and how do we really examine what's this for? Why am I doing this?
I think you touched on one that, yeah, is really interesting from a social psychological perspective. Is we do feel like complaining is giving us something. And I think for a lot of people, it is the combination of, like you said, being right, which triggers a hit of dopamine in our brain when we feel right or like we've accomplished something. We're getting that quick hit of dopamine. Um, And also, again, just the social connection and the bonding. Or even in some situations, it's putting other people down. And in the example of like complaining that your partner is always late, and therefore you're making yourself feel a little bit better about it. But that is extremely interesting framing, because we see what we're getting, that hit of dopamine, that feeling right. But oftentimes we are a little bit blind to what we're losing. To your point, everything has a cost. Good things, bad things, things that are neutral, everything. And again, when we complain, we're actually losing some of that connection, maybe with our partner, that we keep putting down over and over again. We're creating these micro tears in the relationship. Or, like I said, we're harming our body and our brain because we're creating a chemical environment that fuels inflammation and chronic stress. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, complaining can have a quick hit of dopamine, which blinds us to the fact that we're also losing something on the back end. There's also something really interesting about complaining, and that example you gave with Hank. And
Right, it's
the
integrative. Hank. I don't know, Hank.
yeah, I don't know, Hank. It could be colder. Like, something that's really interesting is humans have something called a negativity bias, and a lot of people have heard of this, but it's when our brains naturally pay more attention to potential problems than what's going well, because we're risk adverse. We would rather we pay more attention to things that could harm us than things that could make us happy, because our brains don't care about happiness, they don't care about joy, they don't care about success, they don't care about getting that promotion or landing that investment.
Ooh,
Our
can I
brains,
pause you? Can I pause you right there?
yes, yes,
What part of us actually does care?
yes. The socially constructed part of our brain cares about all of those things, about success. The part of our brain that is very survival driven, that is trying to keep us alive, doesn't care about that. The deeply ingrained pathways don't care about that. Our brain's job is to keep us alive, and one of the ways it does that is by identifying and flagging potential threat. And so because of that, we have the negativity bias. We would rather pay attention and remember where the poison berry bush is, rather than watching a beautiful sunset, because that poisonous berry bush could kill us. So we're more likely to remember the location of that than we are to remember something that is positive. And so this comes into the example you gave with Hank on the mountain. Is we're always looking for that next thing. Like, it can be the perfect day, so beautiful, the weather is perfect, the sky is blue, there's a slight breeze, everything can be perfect, but our brain is literally always scanning the environment for, but what's wrong here?
Mm.
What could threaten me? What could potentially go wrong? That is negativity bias. And it's, again, an evolutionary development. We would rather see what's wrong than appreciate what's beautiful. And then the other did you want to say something
Oh
there?
no, this is so good. Yeah, keep going.
Um, yeah, sorry. Stop me at any point. I go off on tangent. The other part of it, again, is the brain is a prediction machine. So once a problem is solved, it immediately starts looking for the next mission and the next thing to predict. So what comes next? What is the next thing that I need to address? So that's also part of it. And then something called the hedonic effect. Humans get used to improvements. So if you think about, like, trying to think, and this happens to us all the time. So buying a new house. At first, you're so excited about this new house. You put so much effort into saving up money. You put on the down payment. It's a beautiful house in a beautiful location with a beautiful yard. And then three months later, you're picking at everything that's wrong with the house. You're saying, oh, and I do this. I just bought a house in February, and it's a beautiful house, and it's a house that my fiance and I are going to grow our family in, and it backs up to a lake, and literally right across the street, we have a path that takes us to the Miami Whitewater Forest, and it's stunning. And we're so proud of it. And a few weeks after we moved in, I was like, I really don't like the color of the brick. Why did they pick that brick color? What can I do about this? I think I'm going to lighten it up. And I had AI design me 12 different images of what I was going to do to the outside of this house. And that is the hedonic effect. We get used to improvements very, very quickly. And then we don't get excited about it anymore. It becomes the norm and it becomes ordinary. And it's part of that complaining process of, okay, well, this isn't as great as it was 2 weeks ago, and I'm immediately looking for ways to improve it. That's kind of where complaining also comes from.
Mm. And what would be practices that you see have been successful in keeping sort of an appreciative view? Like I see this with relationships a lot, where it's like, oh, we've been, we're so familiar, then it's just like you just pick out every little imperfection and you forget to pay attention to the beautiful person standing right in front of you, right? This house, right? Same, right? It's like enamored with it, and the next thing you know, like, oh yeah, I'm not sure if I like, whatever. How do you keep it fresh so that you don't get, I guess, distorted so much where you take a pessimistic view?
That's a great question. And I think one of the best things you can do is like flip it around. So instead of looking at what's negative, have a gratitude practice. And it sounds woo woo, like have a gratitude practice, name 3 things you're grateful for every single day. But research strongly supports gratitude practice and its ability to pull you out of states of depression and anxiety, to increase your oxytocin, your serotonin, your sustainable dopamine. And so I would say a gratitude practice. And what you need in order to have a gratitude practice is stillness, you need quiet, and you need self-reflection and awareness. You need to be able to sit down, get out of the hustle and bustle of everyday life, stop outsourcing everything externally, saying, because, with my house, what it was for me is I saw a house down the street that had a color brick that I liked better. So I'm comparing my house to that house down the street because I think that one looks better. And so what I realized is, okay, like put your blinders on, get rid of all of that external noise and focus on what you have. I have a beautiful house and it's in an amazing location. And I am so incredibly happy for this. And everyone that comes over says what a beautiful house it is. And they're so happy for my fiance and I. And then I start to say, okay, instead of picking everything I hate about it, let me pick everything I love about it. And I realize everything I love about it is way more important than the tiny little things that I'm picking at that literally have no meaning at all and are completely ridiculous. But yeah, so those are the few things I would say is you have to slow down, you have to become aware, and that is what allows you to have this practice of gratitude, which can completely change your perspective and shift your interpretation of things. And then also it completely chemically changes the environment that your brain is in, to away from that complaining, that negativity, that stress, that inflammation, the cortisol, towards oxytocin and serotonin and sustainable dopamine, which is the state where creativity surfaces and just joy and the ability to appreciate the good in life rather than being stuck in that innate negativity bias that we all have.
So let's go back to Hank's friend. And let
Yes.
me just spitball here for a moment because it's just such a funny example. Could it be, and I'm wondering if this almost like points to an awareness practice, could it be that Hank's friend was actually subconsciously worried about the temperature and it showed up as a reflexive complaint as a result of that? So his body may be saying this temperature is concerning, throwing up a warning flag, but it expressed itself in that casual mode. So first off, could that be the mechanism of what may have been going on subconsciously?
100%. Yes. If you are worried about something and if he was really struggling up that mountain and sweating really hard, and maybe his heart was pounding a little bit faster than it usually does. And that could absolutely be a subconscious signal from his body saying, oh, we're kind of struggling here. Are we going to be okay? Do you need to do something to make sure that we're safe? So yeah, absolutely, that can come out in the form of complaining.
So one of the things that I learned and brought into great practice that I'd still use today was through marathoning, which was to every mile do a body scan. So as you're running along, you go foot to the top of your head and you just check in. How are my feet? How are my ankles? How are my calves? Whatever. Only just to simply assess. Yeah, I'm noticing cramping. Whatever it may be, and then you make adjustments accordingly. And think about Hank's friend. I wonder, in that, could there be a practice there? And we do this like on our long distance hiking, is sort of just check in. What are we noticing? It's not about complaining about the weather. It's more like noticing the heat's having me consume tons of water, right? And so I'm wondering if that, there may be an interesting practice to just notice that, hey, this is coming up for me, but instead of verbalizing it as a complaint, to just note it. It's warmer than I thought. Did I prepare? Or what do I do? Should I be drinking more water, for example? I'm just curious, like, what does that, does that suggestion make sense?
Yes. Oh, 100%. I'll tell you exactly why. So again, when we get stuck in these loops of complaining, it's often a sign of, overwhelm, unmet needs, chronic stress, and everything else we've already talked about, the social connection and all of that, and the habitual loop that we stay stuck in. And when all of those things are true, or one of them is true, they don't all have to be true. But at the bottom of it, complaining creates a sense of stress and anxiety, especially when we, again, stay stuck in that loop and don't use it to drive action and behavior to change the situation. And what's happening when that occurs is we're activating the threat detection system in the brain. We're activating primarily the amygdala. There's lots of other networks involved here, but I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the amygdala. But you can think of it as the alarm system, the fear center, the threat detector area of the brain. It's associated with an increase in cortisol and an increase in adrenaline. And what most people don't realize is that you have an off switch to the amygdala. And we've talked about this in other podcasts. What I remember one of our last conversations, you were telling me about how you had this major panic attack when you were hiking, and like what other tools and strategies can you use? And I had told you, look around what's around you. And if you see a rock, try to name 5 things that start with the letter R. Or if you see the color blue, try to name 5 things that are the color blue. And the same kind of thing applies here. So what you were getting at with trying to say, okay, this is the complaint that I feel coming up in me. It's extremely hot. It could be colder. Where is that coming from? And how can I reframe this to be a little bit more productive? So by asking yourself, did I prepare well? Did I drink enough water? What else can I do in the future so that this temperature may not affect me as much as it is right now? When we ask ourselves those questions, we are internally reflecting. We're considering a lot of other potential outcomes and avenues and paths to take so that we don't land in the same position again. And when we're doing that, we're activating the prefrontal cortex, which is the off switch to the amygdala, because they have an inverse relationship. So if our amygdala is detecting all of this threat and it's saying, everything's on fire, we're in danger, sound the alarms, the prefrontal cortex goes offline because we don't need to think logically. We don't need to remember things. We don't need to think creatively because we're in a direct threat. All we need to do right now is address this threat and survive. But if we can catch ourselves in that state and say, oh, the amygdala is taking over right now. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling like overwhelmed. And if we have that moment of awareness and we create a little bit of space for ourselves, we can actually consciously activate the prefrontal cortex by doing what you said, asking questions, labeling the situation. Did I prepare well? Did I drink enough water? What could I do to better support myself so that next time I don't feel this? When we ask ourselves those questions and we have to assess the answers, we're activating the prefrontal cortex, which inversely lowers the amygdala and helps us to kind of get out of that fight or flight state.
Now let's play that out a little further, because this is, again, my experience working in human systems with human beings, using complaints as a very useful and known thing. There, there is no substitute, I find, for what taking action gives us. Right? There's having the complaint, that's a use of energy, and if we're not willing to act on the complaint, it causes, as we're suggesting, a downward spiral. But when we're willing to act, the ownership of taking responsibility gives us a beautiful hit. I find there's nothing that feels better than when there's something there needing to be addressed, yet the absence of addressing. It's one way we can use our energy and then have the complaint, versus there's something there that I am going to address. There's something special that happens to us when we take that responsibility instead of abdicating that responsibility. I'm curious about your thoughts on the neurological side of what I'm describing.
Yeah, on taking action. So taking action is extremely important. It's extremely powerful. It's hard. It's hard because it requires energy. It requires effort. And again, the brain's a survival machine. It's a prediction machine. The brain does not want to exert energy where it doesn't need to. And so the brain's default is going to stay in that habitual loop because it's practiced that loop over and over. The trigger, the behavior, the reward, the trigger, the behavior, the reward, the trigger, the behavior, the reward. We are literally programmed to stay in that loop and to not change anything about it because change requires effort. Effort takes energy. The brain does not want to spend energy where it doesn't have to.
Well, let me pause you there.
Yeah.
But the complaint is using often way more energy because we're worried about it. It's taking it like starts to distort everything, and we start to take on it. I mean, the cost of not doing anything is extremely high. The cost of acting on it tends to be way lower. Then why the heck is our brain doing that?
So in the long run, the cost of complaining is a lot higher. But in the immediate moment, the perception of the complaint is that it is less expensive than the action.
Does this go back to like our relationship with future?
Yes.
That we don't understand the payoff?
Yes. Our brains are not concerned with the future. Our brains are concerned with right now. So what our brains say is, okay, our perception of this complaint is that it's less costly than it is to take action because we've rehearsed this over and over again. Our brain doesn't look out days from now, weeks from now, years from now to realize, oh, actually, if I keep complaining and not doing anything, there's going to be this snowball effect, and it's going to be way more expensive to maintain that complaint than it is to actually take action right now. But our brain isn't concerned with that in the future because it potentially won't happen. Our brains are concerned with right now. And so what our brains see is we've walked this trail before. We know where it leads. We can do it with our eyes closed. It doesn't take a lot of energy or effort, but the action, the change to make the complaint into something that fuels a better outcome for us, that's costly. That's unfamiliar. That's really, really expensive and requires a ton of energy. And so naturally, our brains are resistant to it. If we think back to like the new year or a fresh start, people promise themselves, I'm going to change, I'm going to do it this time, I'm going to work out, I'm going to give up alcohol, I'm going to eat better, whatever it is. There's this interesting paradox with a fresh start where we feel extremely motivated for that very short period of time. But eventually we fall back into those old pathways because our brains are initially, for lack of a better word, tricked by the fresh start. And our dopamine rises because everything feels new. We have this temporal landmark that separates our past limitations, our past perceived limitations from who we are in the future. And when that happens, again, dopamine increases. It keeps us motivated to do that thing. But eventually our brain catches up and says, actually, this is a lot harder than I thought it was. And this is costly. So we're going to revert back to not eating well, not going to the gym, and having those 3 glasses of wine before we go to bed. And again, that's because those pathways are deeply ingrained. And our brain is always going to default to what it is familiar with and what it is used to. And it doesn't have the ability to see in the future, which is why I always harp on how important it is for us to be conscious of the subconscious. Because when we can realize that that is just our programming, it's not our identity, it's just what we've practiced, it's
There,
what we, yes, it's what
there's
we've
the distinction right there. Let's just give that the space it needs. Say that again really slow.
when we realize that this is just our programming and not our identity, we take our power back.
Yeah.
And most people get stuck believing that things never work out for me and I always give up and I never follow through. And they think that that is their identity. They think that is their personality. And the truth is, it's just biology. When
Mm.
we realize that that is not our identity, whether it's complaining or whether it's not following through on our goals, when we realize that that is quite literally just a neural pathway in our brain that we've been exposed to at a young age or that we've practiced throughout our life, and it's not our identity, it's not who we are, we have the ability to change and move forward. When we get conscious of that, we get all of our power back. And that's what I used to heal from a severe eating disorder and exercise addiction, was realizing, no, this is quite literally just a pattern that I've practiced. It's not me. It's not who I am. I have the ability to get over this. And it applies to things as serious as an eating disorder and to things as silly as complaining about rainy weather.
Mm. I here's what I've been doing in exercises, particularly with leaders, emergent leaders, you name it. Um, it is to really help them build a business case for taking action, and that's really sort of a process of making something that is occurring for them. It's the complaint cycle, to really help surface it to the degree in which they can actually see what it's costing. It always starts in the framing with you get what you allow. So the follow-up question is, what are you allowing? And it's not necessarily allowing that's bad, just what are you allowing? And then as it relates to things, what are you allowing that you're complaining about? Okay, why are you allowing it? And to write that down. And then in allowing it, what is it costing you?
Mm-hmm.
And the most powerful sort of mathematics in there is, what is you needing to compensate for this thing costing you, as far as how much time you're spending on covering for the gap in performance or the gap in accountability, right? And what is that keeping you from that you should be doing? And so before long, it's not hard for someone to go, oh my gosh, this is worth addressing. It's costing me more than I thought, but I needed to actually walk through and build an intelligent business case. Almost like, imagine if you were, you were a senior leader, you had a board of directors, almost like, why they should be saying, why are you spending all this time allowing this thing to be unresolved when we need your brain spent over here, right? So it's kind of like this, how do we tap into the analytical side of self to say, wow, I could actually spreadsheet this out and it's costing a fortune, which I find is my experience for so many, when they do this within 24 hours, they're on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're on top of it
Yeah.
in a very gentle and kind way, in a very thoughtful way, which we can get into in another episode. But it just made them be compelled for action, and making what you described as the expensive investment in what I don't know what's going to happen, right? The thing that seems harder, it's
Yeah.
enough to like do it.
Do you see in those situations that they stick with it, or do they fall back into old habits of then allowing again?
It all depends on how they hold the repeating pattern of, again, I find it has to come down, like when we feel like a punch in the gut from it, you're like, when we realize, oh my gosh, this is costing me personally, and let's say my organization a fortune, allowing this,
Mhm.
and with discipline behind the action. I don't mean disciplinary action. I mean that I'm approaching the reconciliation of this, or creation of a new condition with rigor, uh, then it plays out really, really well. Meaning the idea that oftentimes reflexively, if we get to an unhealthy place of taking action, then we'll do like a drive-by, yell at the situation, hope it goes away kind of thing. And we all know that doesn't go so well. It's much more about bringing to the surface and being clear with, let's say, another person. Here's the condition that I'm noticing. Here's what it's costing us. How are we going to have it change? And then what do we do to put that in place and take a more thoughtful approach to remediation, if you will, into a appropriate state of performance or accountability, or whatever the behavior is that they're looking to address. So I find the action comes quickly, and then to the degree in which it gave us that gut punch is the same degree in which I'm never going to allow that again. And so my new habit is to run toward setting the stage to have it not be the case that that happens again.
Mhm.
It's when we forget to keep doing that, like when we, here's another way to say it. When we try to address it directly, it will always come back because the conditions are the same, including
Mhm.
our own. And so what it is really about is, how do I create conditions and care for the conditions that favor it not happening again, including the conditions for myself, the
Mhm.
conditions in the environment for the other, that
Mhm.
allow us to maintain that condition. And even rolling it back a bit further goes back to something you and I talked about earlier, is our bias toward thinking it's a problem to fix instead of, no, it's a condition to care for. It's a
Mhm.
condition to establish and lovingly care for, no different than our hygiene. What if we treated that the same, right? Like relationship, where they break down is when we see them as problems to fix instead of, we forgot to take care of the condition that allowed for the best of us to show up.
That's brilliant. We forgot to take care of it. Yeah, absolutely. And that makes total sense. And we see that theme expand throughout all different areas of life. And I think one thing you touched on there was when you try to attack it head on directly, it often fails because you're not addressing the environment that it's living in. And then that environment ultimately takes it back to square one. And what you're getting at there is like creating a foundation and creating systems. And when I have people come to me with, habit change, because that's essentially what we're talking about with complaining is habits. Um, when I have people come to me with habit change of like, I'm really trying to do this thing and I don't have the discipline that you have, or I don't have the motivation or whatever it might be. I always say, what does your system look like? And they're like, system? What do you mean? What's a system? Like, you need systems. You can't rely on motivation forever, because if you think of like motivation or changing a habit, or when it comes to complaining, fueling it into action rather than just continuing in that 3-step cycle, we can think of it as like lighting a campfire. Motivation is the match, and it creates the spark, and we need it. We need that flame. But if all we have is the match, it's going to burn out really, really quick. We need fuel, and our fuel is the systems that we put in place.
There you go.
And for organizations like you work with, those systems look completely different from organization to organization. It's completely dependent on what their objectives are, on the people working in the environment, etc. When it comes to the individual, I have like a 5-step process that I give to people. And there's also an amazing book called Atomic Habits that talks about this a lot, but it's all about creating those systems and about establishing that firewood so that your match actually has somewhere to land, rather than just burning out in your hand.
Mm, yeah, this I love how you said that. Um, and it's not hard to, like, I always like, my own examination would be, what is it that I'm 100% reliable for paying attention to? And
Mm,
for me, I'll never let somebody down who I've scheduled a meeting with. So if it's on my calendar and the meeting's there, like that is like something I'm 100% reliable for. So when I was marathoning, like the system was a training partner that I know was waiting for me. I would always show. I may not have any interest in running, could be the worst weather in the world, but I knew someone was there waiting, and vice versa. We never missed a single training run. And so it's like, what is the thing that you know you're good for, and know yourself, right? And then game yourself.
That's exactly it. You're gaming yourself. And that's a brilliant example because you're then, I always say the brain listens to patterns, not promises. So
Mm,
you are creating a pattern for your brain to follow, opposed to saying, oh, well, this time I'm going to go to the gym, or this time it's going to be different. Your brain doesn't listen to what you want it to do. Your brain listens to what you physically do. So at some point, it's going to be really important for you to get over that thing that you don't want to do. So maybe, and I'm exactly the same way. I had a crazy day at work today. And I'm like, no, I have a schedule with Brent. I'm showing up. I am not canceling it. Like, this is important to me, and I'm sticking to it. That is both a promise I made, but also a pattern that I am going to establish. And your brain wants evidence of the thing. And so when you do that for yourself, when you show up, if you have an item on your calendar, you show up no matter what, you're giving your brain evidence that this is who you are. And then in the future, it makes it easier for you to repeat that. So if we go back to like the fresh start thing with the new year, um, you at first it might take a lot of extra effort to make that change, and it's going to. The dopamine's going to wear off. You're no longer going to be able to rely on motivation. But when you create the systems in place, you make that match be able to stick and create fire, because you're providing the fuel for that match, for that the flame of motivation. And eventually that fire will just burn on its own. You don't have to
mm,
tend to it anymore. You don't have to pay attention to it. It's going to burn it, and it's going to maintain itself. And you might just have to provide a little bit of evidence here and there. Yep, this is still me. This is still how I operate. This is still the pattern that I follow. And that is when, maybe that fire starts to get a little bit lower. You put a couple little sticks on it. And that is that little jolt of fuel, AKA your pattern that you are repeating, reminding your brain, yes, this is who I am. And eventually, what was once effortful requires less effort. That effort then eventually becomes your new neural pathway, and it becomes automatic. Automatic eventually becomes your identity and who you are. And
mm.
so, what you're doing by creating that system for yourself is creating your identity based off of it. I am somebody who shows up to promises that I make.
Wow. Not to, you know, at the end of this to be a downer, but I've had this experience directly, deeply personal and wounded circumstances. But uh, I'd say, here's an incentive for to keep an eye on how much you're complaining and what you're using those complaints for is, for those experiencing you, it says something. I find it tough to be around people that just complain away taking action or whatever's going on. There's always somebody to blame. And I was thinking of the a gravestone that would be incredibly regrettable is, the world's to blame for why it didn't work out for me. And so here I am, right? And I see a lot of that and have some direct experience of it. So it just sort of, I share that as a provocation to say, be mindful of how you're showing up, and is it full of complaints, and what is that suggesting? It's tough to be around someone that's doing that.
I'm so glad you brought that up at the end, because that is a huge takeaway when it comes to complaining, is being very aware of, am I this person? Am I negatively impacting those around me? Because you quite literally change the chemical environment and the nervous system of those that you surround yourself with. And that's why, the phrase, you are the sum of the people you spend the most time with, it is absolutely true. So ask yourself, like you just said, Brent, am I that person? Or is somebody I spend a lot of time with that person? And do they have the potential to influence me to eventually become that?
Yeah. Yeah. Good watch out for us all, I think. Because something, something you said earlier, which I really didn't know much about, was the fact that being around that, I've noticed that because I'm like, that is the opposite of anything I want to be about is, having that kind of complaint mindset. Yet when you show up, like in a social gathering, whatever it would be, if that's their modus operandi, like I find myself like almost participating. It's like, oh, I don't want to
Mhm.
join the complaint train on this thing. Um, so yeah, it's wild to think about that you're actually affecting those around you without even knowing it.
Yeah, it's easy to do because it happens below your conscious
There it
awareness.
is.
You're not consciously aware that, hey, my nervous system is shifting right now into a state of stress and complaining, and the chemical environment in my brain is changing, and my cortisol is increasing. It happens below most of our conscious awareness. So it's very, very easy to jump on that bandwagon without even realizing it, which why I think in nearly every episode we have done, we have talked about the importance of creating space and creating stillness and creating quiet. And that's why space is so important because, again, it gives you the opportunity to assess what am I
Mm.
feeling right now? What is my body telling me? And is this somewhere I want to be or not?
A way to say it may be the beware of the secondhand smoke effect of
Yes.
complaints. You could literally toxify a whole group without knowing it.
Perfect. Yeah. I have nothing to add. That's exactly the way.
Perfect place to end this round. Again, for those listening, curious about your thoughts on this and anything to add, throw it in the comments. Will be next time it's your turn, so I get to be surprised yet again by a question I'll be unaware of as we enter in. So yeah, as always, I just love unpacking all this, and I'm learning so much from you. So thank you.
Likewise. Same. Love this.